Welcome to Michigan Reimagined, presented by T.A. Forsberg and Wagoner Financial. And here's your host, Chris Buck.
Well, I certainly love getting to meet fantastic people and companies throughout Michigan and tell their stories, especially those who advocate for the Michigan brand. And today's guest is a perfect example of Michigan's passion, and actually more specifically, Detroit passion. I'm happy to welcome back photographer and Emmy award-winning filmographer, a filmmaker, Mr. Stephen McGee. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely. So, give us a quick summary on your time before arriving to Detroit, because I know you're not from here originally. When did you show up, and what were your impressions of Detroit upon arrival?
Yeah, so I've been to 40 countries working for nonprofit groups and foundations, and traveling to countries where there were incredible ruins like Italy and Greece and Southeast Asia, and then also meeting people in incredible circumstances that could define them, but they were stronger than them. They were like the gold amongst the challenge. In Southeast Asia and Africa really prepared me, honestly, for moving to Detroit in 2005. I was living in California. I was learning how to be a filmmaker, but learning most of the things and the lessons overseas. And the Detroit Free Press asked me to move out to Detroit to start their video department during a time where newspapers were trying to figure out what their next role was in news journalism. And having all these experiences, some of which almost took my life in many different ways, really just put me in a place internally that wanted that shift. It prepared me, to see a city that was being defined by its challenges, and for the most part, an external narrative that eclipsed the reality of the people on the inside. Right, and
it's funny you say that, because I'm not from Michigan either. I moved here in 2008, from Philadelphia, Seattle, and studied abroad and been a lot of places around the world. And I'll tell you, Michigan's narrative and Detroit's narrative is defined by the people who aren't here. But right?
Dude, I can't even tell you. I was actually considering my California education. In the 80s, we had a video game called Oregon Trail.
Yes.
Which literally the entire nation played.
Yep.
To learn how to move away from the Midwest towards the West Coast. And my gosh, if you died along the way, you clearly weren't ready for the West Coast.
Right.
And I'm looking at this and I'm like, wow, even in my childhood, there was a narrative that was like, we built this state because of gold. I'm like, we're living in an 1849 to the point where our football team is the 49ers, and you're living inside this narrative that's promoted by Hollywood, that's promoted by a lot of people on every level of society, to where I'm in Southeast Asia or Italy and people are dreaming of California.
Right.
And dude, I could not point until very recently where Ohio or Indiana are, because of that education. I mean, obviously, in my 20s, I knew that, but there's just something about the Midwest, which, you can throw out the word like Fresh Coast or Central Coast or whatever, and people are like, wait, what? But they want to associate it with Rust Belt or, just not as cool as the coasts. And I think that's an interesting thing to consider.
Well, that whole concept is the impetus for this podcast.
Yeah.
Not being from here, having some of those stereotypes, trying to re-educate my family and friends who are not from Michigan that Michigan isn't just Detroit.
Yeah.
And B, Detroit is not the problem that everyone talks about. Right. And so we need to kind of get out of our own way, because, you think about the cool, sexy towns that people seem to be more enamored with, but I can tell you Chicago's got problems.
Yeah.
Right. Nashville's got problems. Charlotte, North Carolina's got problems. Austin, Texas has problems, and Detroit has problems. But they all, the other towns seem to have a more positive perception.
Yeah.
And Detroit deserves a much better perception than it already has. And I'm a massive fan of Detroit today.
Yeah.
And in the future, I bet heavily on Detroit's future. So
yeah. And I think that's even as a child in San Francisco, we used to vacation near Crystal Lake because my parents went to Torch Lake, 50 years ago from St. Louis. And so they would drive up in a station wagon that had wood panels, as a child, that's what we would do. And we'd get to that. And so I even had a connection with Michigan as a child, but I would never have considered moving here until I was invited. And I think that's a big thing with narratives, right? When you're invited into the narrative, you as a person begin to change because you have an emotional connection to a story that you didn't have before. And I think in my time over the past 20 years in Detroit, I keep on getting invited into scenarios, whether it's with billionaires that buy 100 buildings or own, the Lions, or, people who are running block clubs or, mowing their neighbor's yard because they don't want the abandoned house next to them torched or demolished, honestly.
Right.
And so, there's these like the depth of the culture you're living in is, if honestly, if you're living in a place where you don't know your neighbors, it's sometimes hard to understand how to tell a story of a city you don't even know. So the easy things, the low hanging fruit are those abandoned buildings,
right,
which largely defined the city up until about 2015.
Makes sense. In that vein, I'd like to thank one of my sponsors. And when it comes to creating the best living and working environments for the community, no one does it better than my friends at the Forsberg Real Estate Company. Brent Forsberg and his team create vibrant, holistic communities that inspire growth and encourage belonging. Focusing on building stronger connections for people, the Forsberg projects always are in tune with balancing relationships and creating the optimum human experience. Since the 1950s, Forsberg has been enhancing the quality of lives in the communities they serve by following the principle of regenerative growth and aligning the resources and tools that are available. Reach out to my friends at Forsberg Real Estate Company by calling 517-349-9330 or check out their website at lansingrealestate.com. So Detroit has a pretty robust arts community, right? I mean, do you feel connected to other people that are in that space, or are you more isolated in your own endeavors?
I mean, Detroit's art scene is an incredibly, it's been going on for decades, and I feel like it's just now being recognized on an international schedule and scale that is very exciting to me because it has been. Somebody described it to me as it's really easy to go from A to B in Detroit as an artist, but to get to B to C, that stage hasn't been here. So if you move to New York, it's impossible to get to A. But if you get from B to C, you can get C to D. And so now people are now going back and being like, okay, who were the artists in the 2000s? Who were the artists in the 1990s? Who were the artists in the 1980s? And where is that art today? And so whereas this narrative arc of the buildings that largely define the city, amongst that landscape, all you needed to do is turn the tripod head 50 degrees or 30 degrees or 180 degrees, and you would find artists who are able to live sustainable lives, create, and what they created is to me, I think, should be across this, the national landscape, because of the importance of the narrative that created the situation where they were able to create.
Okay.
So, I mean, when my wife moved to Detroit from California, we instantly got this film series for the Kresge Foundation in 2010 to 2015, where we did 140 artist films across the city.
Wow.
And she's an athlete and she didn't know anything about artists. And so it was like this blitz for her to get to know the city. It was me getting to know more artists on a scale that is unimaginable in California. Possibly across the Midwest, but there were people who were moving from out of town because they wanted to buy a house that was affordable, and they turned the house into a speaker system because of all of the available nails that were vibrating. They turned it into actually a subwoofer. So you'd go in there and they would play Mozart, but it was the house moving and rattling in a way. And that it's just beyond an incredible opportunity to see the beautiful opportunities that the human brain can get to when you have that. Then there were people who were, taking these abandoned lots and turning some beautiful things. And they always say that artists move into places before the financial investors. So I think the challenge today is to really try and figure out how to have that conversation right now. Right.
And it's got to help your subject matter that Detroit is doing a lot of stuff right now, right? I mean, so in addition to just having a renaissance in its own right, you've got it. They had a March Madness stop not long ago. We're recording this in early May of 2024, but so March Madness, NCAA basketball had a long weekend there. NFL draft blew everyone's minds and broke records, historically for the NFL. The Detroit Grand Prix is back racing through the streets of Detroit. I think this is the second year that they're doing that. The Michigan Central Station, which I know Bill Ford Jr. was the impetus for that, but I know he gives a lot of the credit to other people that have a hand in that, is unveiling in mid-June. So I got to believe that helps, your world, whether you're contracted by one of these organizations or companies to film or take photographs of these events, or just as a creative having subject matter. I mean, does that help? I'm kind of pushing that in your face, but
no, I mean, it's been a really interesting 20 years that I could have never plotted, because my clients had kind of changed over every 3 years. So I went from the newspaper to very broke in the streets of Detroit, biking the city, looking for positive stories that nobody wanted to buy. I mean, the national media wanted the worst of the worst, is what they would tell me. I'm like, well, there's great humans amongst that worst. And so even just that lens, I'm super sensitive to, right?
Yep.
And, then it goes into the foundations, which really knew the local beat. And then it went into people who were investing heavily in the city. So every 3 years or 4 years, my lens would shift, which created this incredible network of people. I mean, I can go on the top of the Penobscot building, which is owned by a billionaire from Toronto. I can go on top of the Fisher building, which is owned by somebody else who's my largest photography collector. I can go anywhere through the bedrock atmosphere. I can go through, and it's just like this incredible key to the city that I feel a great burden with and a great responsibility, because it's mirrored with that incredible art community, incredible, the people who call Detroit home, and I think that the draft was such a success because of the strength of Black Detroit and the people who live in the city for more than the 5 years. If it was just a bunch of people, I don't want to say there's two narratives, but there is something just to say that there's a strong foundation in the city that has been largely unnoticed and underreported, that I just think is incredibly beautiful and shows the strength of this region as Michigan, because I think there's just so many things here that that people are just now getting an open ear to that weren't open to it in 2014, 2015, but now just even the Lions, like you were mentioning, the Lions opened the ear to the country in a way. I flew my wife out and the poet I worked with, Jessica Care Moore, it was a very expensive trip to go to that 49ers game, but it was something I believed in because it was my childhood home. It was the metropolis of my youth.
Right.
And we kind of got into this last time, but I think that it's an interesting thing that history repeats itself sometimes with decentralizing large industries, which we don't have time to get into right now, but to see San Francisco
yep.
and have this doom loop and
right.
these things, these narratives that were cloaking, and hovering over Detroit's narratives for so many years. And I wanted to be there with the Lions if we won, and I was going to storm the field, and I was probably going to get put into jail, but it would have been a great story.
And they should have.
We should have won. I know,
gosh,
but this year,
heartbroken.
but that momentum,
yep.
just to support the city, and then to have the draft. These next 2 months, we're a month into a 2 month. We're about a month into 2 months of just incredible things happening in the city of Detroit on a scale that everybody knew was possible, but the reception is global, and it's positioning the city both in the news and in the subconscious as a global leader. And I think mixed that with people calling, we were up in Traverse City again, and there were some people from New York on the beach, and I was like, where are you guys from? And they're like, oh, we're from New York. I was like, well, how did you hear about Elk Rapids? And they're like, well, it's the New Hamptons. And I was like, got it. And I was like, is this really a thing? They were bankers. Bankers are flying from New York City direct to Traverse City. And you look at the direct to Traverse City routes, and it's this is not, if this was Detroit being powerful in 2012, it would have just been a come and gone type moment. But the whole city from east to west is happening. I mean, the best chefs are moving in from Austin and New York and San Francisco. They're opening up these places. And I feel like that ripple effect is happening. And we're I don't know. I'm like, dude, I want to know Pontiac's story. I want to know Flint's story. These things that people are like, no. I'm like, well, they're saying no right now, but 15 years from now, I'm just, it's something's happening.
That's fantastic. I want to get this out of the way so we can dive into Resurgo, but I want to talk about my friends at Triterra. They're a leading environmental consulting firm headquartered in Lansing, Michigan, with staff around the state to serve your brownfield development, environmental consulting, and natural resource management needs. Since 2008, Triterra has been successfully advising a wide range of organizations to implement solutions to complex environmental challenges. If you are a business, a developer, a property owner, a lending institution, an attorney, or a governmental entity looking for a solution, and you want prompt and timely service, do not hesitate to contact my friends at Triterra. Led by CEO and visionary Don McNabb and his senior partners JP Buckingham and Dave Van Haren, and supported by dozens of technical experts, you can't miss by calling Triterra at 517-702-0470 or check them out at triterra.us. They mean it when they say it's not just what we do, it's who we are and how we do it. So Resurgo. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about, okay, I think everyone now knows your passion, your lens, and all the things that are great happening here in Michigan. But you are about ready to launch a completed project, or maybe a version of a completed project that spans a long time of your time here in Michigan. Talk about Resurgo.
Yeah, so I come from a background of photojournalism. So my filmmaking is always about trying to make personal moments, and the dedication to that frame, no matter where I am in the world, and the dedication to getting to the depths of humanity. When you do that every day, and you do that in the city of Detroit over 20 years, it creates quite an archive. And
right.
when the investment from the Gilberts and the Illiches and all the families take shape over that 20 years, it's easy to see that there's, something that's bigger than just this comeback story, right? And when you combine that with the global travels and everything I've already talked about, that's really the foundation of this project called Resurgo. I wanted to make a feature documentary film that honored and paid respect to the people who have opened their lives for me for 20 years. And also tell this personal journey that I've been on, because it was really hard to figure out what the glue was to connect all these people. And I realized I just kind of had to turn the lens on myself, which is a filmmaker's thing to do. But we bought our house for $1. We live across the street from $1 billion investment that was voted to be torn down just 10 years ago, right? Like they literally wanted to tear down Michigan Central Station only in 2013. And in 2013, you could not tell any positive stories of the city of Detroit, because people just wanted to talk about the bankruptcy, which was already 60 years in the making, and so these things are all things that, the waves of people that moved out of the city haven't been invited, might not know about the positive things that are happening. The people that are outside of our state might not know the strengths of this region. And if you were going to ask me what this film is about, I would not be able to tell you.
Okay.
But I can tell you it's going to be connecting all of these things in a way that I think is going to really open the eyes up of the entire world, in a way that invites them. It doesn't point anybody. I'm a middle child. I want balance. Like, I'm not here to be like, you guys did this and you guys did that. But there are a lot of things as a culture, as a society, as a almost 250-year-old country we haven't talked about that caused my house to be $1. A valueless house that's probably worth over $1 million now. And I think that there's something honest about being a family man and being, and just raising our family here and the connections I have across the city. I was in charge of Pure Michigan's films last year. I was in charge of Visit Detroit's films last year. I mean, I'm just in a very interesting place. And I'm like, okay, how, all of this content, I'm like, how do you actually move the bar of this world? There's so much content out there right now. So I'm like, this 2-hour film, I want it done. I want it done by October, because yesterday was the first day of post-production. I gave my hard drives over to my editor, and we walked through all the different narrative arcs I want to get through in 2 hours. And I'm like, I want it done by early October, which is insane to say right now. But I've been just thinking about it. It's just been this like Rubik's Cube in my brain. Yeah. Like, what is it? What has happened? Because people internally in Detroit don't want to call it a comeback. People externally, that's the only thing that's like, what else is it? And so I want to bridge those gaps with this film and invite people into the narratives that I've been invited into. with the heart and the passion and the sensitivity that I've had, but also saying like, this is really a big story. It's not just it's something I wrestle with every day.
Right.
And I think that wrestle is honest. I think that if I had the script, it would be scripted. Right. And it would just feel like I'm a cheerleader being like, Detroit's the best city in the world. And it's like, no, that we are honest with our challenges. So I got to talk about that.
Right.
We're honest with the strengths, in a non-cheerleader way where of course you can be excited for the Lions and the Tigers, but like, what about the person on 6 Mile in Livernois? Like where's their impact? Well, actually $1 billion was just put into that neighborhood, by the Kresge Foundation over over this course of the past 5 years. And it's insane, but like people don't know that, and they don't know that impact. And I can't get into the weeds of all the things. So I have to pick some central characters, who are incredible. One of them is a coach named Collie Sweeney, who I met, and he was living out of his car, but trying to teach kids in Detroit. And I was making $9,000 a year eating bread out of a dumpster, back in 2008 or 9. But Mackenzie Scott just called him the most influential and best run nonprofit group she's ever ran into. And she donated $2 million to his cause. And it was very much because of just some footage that I captured during days when I didn't think anybody was looking, back in 2010 when he was living out of his car. And now he was Detroit Lions Changemaker of the Year. So that like arc is an important arc. It's Jessica Care Moore, who in 2010 was living on food stamps, but her poems were being taught at U of M while I was still eating bread out of a dumpster. Right. And we collaborated on a TEDx piece, TEDx Detroit. And through the years, I was like, okay, 2017's around. I just did a film with Big Sean. How am I going to one-up it? Well, let's go back to Jessica Care Moore. And that film, plus all of her global travels and connections, and introduced her to Gucci, which then introduced her to Pure Michigan, and she became the voice of Michigan. That rags to riches story, although riches is, what is value in this idea of riches? That is in there, and so these things are starting to take shape as like, okay, my global travels as a white Californian move into Detroit. We have the internal voices. What is this lens that we're looking at? Whose lenses are we looking at? And how is history of this moment going to be written?
Right on.
Sorry, that's a lot.
That's fantastic. So, you mentioned giving all of the content to an editor. I think you're right.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, as a creative, and I know a decent amount of creatives, it's hard to take a concept and turn it into a completed project, of this size. So who do you collaborate with? Who are your partners to help make sure that this gets done the way it really should get done? Yeah.
Well, there's two things, right? It's as an entrepreneur, it's hard to know when to make your first investment in yourself financially.
Yep.
So I have a photo show in the Guardian building right now called Pillars, where the draft was happening. I knew 700,000 people were coming downtown. I'm like, I need to print 32 8-foot tall photographs. So this print shop called Second Story Collection out of Ferndale is like, we're going to do it for you, and we're going to make it affordable for you, honestly. But they do all of GM stuff, so they do massive scale stuff. But in a week, we printed 32 8-foot tall photographs and put them in these pillar forms inside the Guardian building. And 3,000 people came through. People were crying. Like people were represented from the neighborhoods in downtown Detroit during a time where you might have been able to miss those narratives. Collaborations like that are pivotal. And so this editor, like there's 3 people on my staff, but I have a $4 million budget if someone is willing to film it, to front that. I have 2.4 million photographs. I have thousands of hours of footage that's worthy of Pure Michigan. Visit Detroit, the best financial banks in the world. I mean, I was Goldman Sachs's filmmaker for 6 years. This is footage and collections of a pivot in American history. Like that's what's been happening in the past 20 years in Detroit. And I'm like, I'm either going to just fund it and get this film out and it's just going to be it, or we actually could really make some stuff, And so I have, I was selected as the most innovative filmmaker in the world in Las Vegas, and out of thousands of filmmakers. And so I won $180,000 of gear in 2017. And that's been really catching this, visual arc in a lot of ways because of the access I had. But that also gave me access to the best of Hollywood. So I can call Fred North, who does all of the visuals that you would ever think about through helicopters. And, but Move Here, Move the World's a great example of when capital comes together with my vision. I was like, I went to Dan Gilbert and I was like, I need a $30,000 helicopter day. Nobody would say, yes, that's a good idea, except for Dan. Dan, I mean, there's a lot of people that can say a lot of great things about him, but personally, I wouldn't be sitting in this chair without the investment he made into Move Here, Move the World. And so I called the best helicopter pilots from Hollywood. I called the best aerial DPs from Hollywood, and we collaborated, and those visuals created, I think, the strength of Move Here, Move the World, connected with Jessica Care Moore's voice. And so Resurgo is that. It's like this 2-hour documentary film, but it's also, I just did a radio show for Switzerland, and the country just put this whole story I'm telling you in German across all of the German Alps of Switzerland. And so like people are hitting me up from Switzerland, like, can you bring your photography show? And I'm like, I just don't understand how I was like, guys, I could bring Michigan's story and Detroit's story because I'm doing pure Michigan stuff. So I have content around the nation. I mean, I could take this show around the nation. So unfortunately, I become kind of like a Disneyland where I'm like, we could do this photography show in San Francisco. We could bring it to the Met. We could bring it to the Louvre, But I think if it's just this 2-hour film, then I at least I've done that.
Right on. Fantastic. So we're hoping October 24?
I'm hoping October 24 because I want to at least allow it an opportunity to be nominated for the Oscars.
Fantastic. Now, where will it be shown? Like, how will you, is it going to be?
Man, I got to get it finished first. And if it's if it's not finished by October, it's because the story needs to further develop. I mean, the opening of the train station to me is the definitive moment of this disinvestment narrative being done.
Right.
People have been talking about the disinvestments of Detroit. Man, I know billions and billions and billions of dollars being invested in the city.
Yeah.
And 10,000 homes have been renovated in the past year in the city of Detroit alone. 10,000 homes. And I mean, so this though is like the crown of like that visual image coming around.
Yeah.
But it's also a great example of the strength that Detroit has always had. And it just has looked a little different, and so if it gets done by October, then I need to premiere it in New York or Los Angeles for a week in a theater, and then it can be nominated for an Oscar. But if it's Oscar worthy, then it should go around the world.
Right on. No, I agree. And for listeners who are trying to keep up with this awesome conversation, Michigan Central Station used to be the train station in Detroit, a beautiful building facing the river that has been empty for decades, that is now ready to be unveiled again in its new life in June 6th.
The best way to put it is that it was commissioned by the same people who did Grand Central Station in New York, and they wanted the money to flow basically between these two bookends, Michigan Central Station and Grand Central Station in New York. And that's the financial capital of the 1920s. They're thinking huge. They're thinking this money is going to always flow there. And so by 1987, when it's abandoned, you can just imagine like something changed.
Yep.
Right. And so then they're opening it back up. So I've been in charge of that documentation for 5 years. I know it intimately. And you got to come. They're going to have public days until June 14th, and you got to reserve that hour because it's a spiritual experience in there.
Yep, I agree. I've been kind of close to it myself, and it's unbelievable. I'm looking forward to that happening. And then Move Here, Move the World. If you can get to YouTube and Google that or put it in the search bar, you'll see a great 4 or 5 minute long sizzle reel about Michigan, and that's 7 years old now, right?
Yeah, they were playing it during the draft in the Hudson's building, which is it was just like Hudson's building, whole Gilbert family, all of Bedrock, people of all backgrounds in football. And they're still playing this film that at the time I didn't really feel like I knew what I was doing. But when you have a dream for more than 7 years, it starts to figure itself out.
Yeah.
And I think that's, if I encourage anybody anywhere, it's just keep going, even if it takes more than a decade to get to that dream, because that's kind of where I'm sitting right now.
Right on. Well, we got to end on that, but until October and this thing gets launched, how can people look at your work? Is there a place where they can go to kind of capture the spirit of everything you've been talking about?
I'm really active on Instagram. So Stephen, STEPHEN _McGee, MCGEE, is where people have been connecting with me. It was just an incredible collaborations with Visit Detroit. I mean, over 1 million people, 4 million people saw one film I did. I mean, it's just like insane. Like the numbers just are becoming, the algorithms are like promoting positive films, of the city of Detroit. And then there's also the photography side is Resurgo Film, RESURGO FILM, on Instagram. And if you want to reach out, I usually hit up the DMs pretty quick.
Perfect. Well, we've been talking to Stephen McGee, who is setting the world on fire here in Michigan, and really grateful to have you here. So thanks for joining me. And I want to give a final shout out to our loyal sponsors, the Forsberg Real Estate Company, Wagner Financial, Triterra Environmental, Good Marketing, the attorneys at Foster Swift, and Keller Williams, Advantage and Team for residential real estate. They're fantastic people worth the call. And if you found the show as a one-off, I want to remind you to follow and subscribe Michigan Reimagine on YouTube, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other places. And my name is Chris Buck. Thanks for listening to Michigan Reimagine, and thanks for being here, Stephen McGee.
Yeah, thank you so much.